From multiple complicated locations in Minneapolis or near enough, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development. I'm Ellen Burns-Johnson, and I make nice games.
I'm Steve McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Mark LaCroix, I too make nice games.
For this week's episode, guest host Holly Harrison joins your nice hosts to discuss fail states and world building. And so, if everyone is ready, let's start.
Holly's back. Excitement.
Hi!
Welcome back, Holly.
It's you.
It's been so long. Hello.
You when you come to the show, you leave it with so much energy that it nourishes us for a very long time. And
that's amazing. Like, as an introvert.
And then we sit around and we like because it starts to wane after a long time, and we're like, why does it not feel as like loving and joyous around here? And it's like, well, we haven't had Holly in a while. And we're like, we haven't had Holly in a while? And then we work to fix that, and we've done it now. Welcome back, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a joy. Congratulations on recently passing 200 episodes.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah, this is one of the 200 in numbers. I don't remember. Is it 201? It's probably 201.
It's probably 201. Steven says it's 201. So, dear listener, when you check this on the website and it's not, you now know who to blame.
Yeah, basically.
And I feel like Steven's right, because I don't think we've done 100 additional episodes between now.
Yeah, we're not on 301 as well.
No.
Right, if it's between those, that's good point. Yep.
Yeah. You cast a wide net. It's in the 200s.
Yes.
Well, Holly, independent of the timing of having you back on the show, you just started a new project. So it ended up being fortuitous. It's not why we have you here. We have you here because we love you and we always want you here. But let's hear about this.
Yeah. Oh, it was actually, I was talking to Steven last night and I was like, oh, shoot, do I need to bring a topic? And Steven was like, no, but if you want to, you can. And I was like, oh, no. I'm not ready to talk about anything. And then I remembered. Okay, so I started a video games culture feed called Lobby. So you can find it on Instagram and Twitter. The handle is Join Lobby. And yeah, that's what that is. It's just a feed devoted to kind of analytical, progressive, scrappy parts of video game culture. Born out of, I used to manage social media accounts with Glitch locally here in the Twin Cities, and noticed that what really kind of always caught on were curating games industry news content and like posting punchy graphics that responded to hot button issues or highlighting the words of disruptive leaders. And at Glitch, I had a hunch that content would work really well for our audience, and I was right. The posts far outperformed their counterparts often in the same period. And so while I was looking on after leaving Glitch and trying to figure out how to stay involved in the games community no matter where my next full-time job took me or freelancing took me, I started this Lobby just in September. So that's that.
I love so much about it, but what I love in particular is that it welcomes everybody, but it has a point of view. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that all games media should strive for.
Yeah, it's been it's nice being able to have an outlet, however like small and startup-y right now it is, to be able to talk about things that I know are being like spoken about in certain corners of the games industry, but not getting like mainstream media pickup. Mainstream games media pickup, of course, there's a difference. But at the same time, every once in a while I post something and I'm like, well, there goes your opportunity to work at any of those companies. Even though I feel like it's important to talk about. There's that.
Well, also, the more that kind of discussion becomes common and safe for people to have, the more likely it is that a company like that will hire someone who has criticized them. Because, one, there's so many, but also because it's healthy part of the conversation, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. For lots of reasons, good and bad. Ubisoft is in the news right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And a post I did recently, when earlier this summer, when news was breaking all over again about lots of like sexual misconduct and toxic cultures within video game companies, Ubisoft was one of the big ones. Mm-hmm. And to their credit, as far as I can tell, at least through what media they've been releasing. They're doing a lot to change it. I mean, and that's like what their PR team is putting out, and everything's going to be imperfect. But long story long, recently I read a ton of reviews of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and listed out which main media sources mentioned even just one sentence the like misconduct issues at Ubisoft, and which ones just skipped over it. And that's that kind of thing that I think is important, and it's important. The argument that lots of people make to step around it is like hundreds of people work on these games, and most of them are good, lovely people. This is their livelihoods, and we need to consider that when we talk about games. But I think one way to make sure those people are happy and well looked after is to make sure that the place that they work at is working on their issues. So anyway, that's like that was fun to look into and fun to post. And at the same time, as I was like, well, I'm a little baby feed and not many people follow me yet, so like no one's going to notice. I always like I put the thing out there being like, well, don't like don't yell at me. I mean, actually no, I'm like down to debate like just reply guys at any time, but or just to block them. But at the same time, I'm like, Ubisoft, don't look at this. I really like some of your accessibility work, and and reading all those Valhalla reviews made me sad that I feel like ethically I can't play it because it sounds like a great game. Good job. Okay, bye.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a sign of progress that we're starting to treat a lot of these big companies more with more depth, like that there's good and bad, and it's starting to make us all conflicted, but that's good, right?
Yeah, because the well-known saying idiom thing is that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, right? So, but like, so it's important to know how, like, which of your ethics you're putting aside when you're buying something, and what you're, it's hard to buy a cell phone that's not made with like slave labor, which is absolutely terrible. But it's good to know that that's happening, rather than being like, well, it's bad. What are we supposed to do about it?
Yeah, if you're just trying to put things in neat dichotomies, then that's bad.
Right. It's like the entire plot of The Good Place. Well, like the late seasons. And they're like, there's no way to get into heaven because everything is, you can't buy a tomato without hurting someone in some way. Anyway, the crux of lobby isn't just lighting up games companies, so that was just a reason.
Right, there's more than that.
That's just a nice side benefit of it.
Right. It's also, reposting people's best tweets and talking about how games can be self-care, but also like can scientifically be used as therapy, like in offices and also like at home. And it's been a fun time just kind of feeling things out, and it's just in its baby stages. I decided to make it an Instagram first platform, which is weird because games is so Twitter focused, but so far that's been paying off because I actually get some interaction on Instagram, whereas on Twitter I'm just like, hello Void, I have a new post.
And it just gets swept downstream with all the tons of other Twitter water.
I also think there's an unprecedented number of people taking breaks from Twitter right now. At least it feels that way in like my own feed, that everyone's like, I can't do this.
When we recorded the 200th episode in our last recording session, it was just 2 days before the election, and now we're past a week past it being called, in fact, which was a half a week past the actual election. So, and you can tell we're all a little chill right now. We're not as high strung as maybe it could have been, and maybe you know why,
right? And which is wild because we're like watching like unprecedented things happening with like small d democracy, and like a coup attempt, but we're like, it's fine, like everything's gonna be okay,
right? It's ultimately, objectively, it's the tiniest amount of good news, but we'll take it.
Right? Yeah. But like within 24 hours, Alex Trebek died. And it's like, can we not have one day?
Yeah.
Holly, why?
Good day in 2020?
No.
I had suppressed that from my mind for a second.
I'm sorry.
Let's move on to new news. Mark,
hold on before we fully
first
move
let's
on.
list all the good people who've died this year.
Yeah.
Oh no.
But let's put about, because the thing about Lobby is it talks about real things, but it's also such a joy to consume. I think that's the main thing is whatever impression you get from the depth we've been talking about it is so much fun to follow. So I definitely recommend it. And before we move on from it, Holly, let's put out those handles again.
Yeah, it's all the platforms that matter. Just kidding. It's Instagram and Twitter. It's at Join Lobby.
Brilliant.
Cool. Okay, so who's gotten the new consoles?
I'm raising my hand over here.
Okay.
That's one
anyone
hand.
else?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Of the four of us, the fact that I got my hands on the next gen console is actually a really high success rate.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Dang, that's sad.
I don't know if any of you were trying to F5 till your finger fell off on pre-orders. But I sort of was. I wasn't like I don't know. I put about as much effort into it as I thought was comfortable. It didn't take too much time out of my day, but I was kind of like I had a bunch of tabs open and I was all the retailers and stuff. And I missed the pre-orders for the PlayStation 5 when it was sprung on everybody back when. And that bummed me out because that's the one I was most interested in from like a platform design perspective. Like the thing about the Xbox is like the technology is just it's Xbox but more, and it's like that's good, but it's hard to get excited about that, frankly. But the PlayStation seemed it's the ugliest console ever made, and that's exciting. And I just wanted to get a look at it with my own eyes, if for no other reason.
No.
But no, all of the new they have a bunch of new ideas in terms of how they the UX of playing games. And then of course their solid state drive is supposedly it's custom hardware that is not just a solid state drive. It's actually got quite a lot going on. And Sony's first party studios are making a specific effort to take advantage of it. The new Spider-Man game, the new Ratchet and Clank game is really going to leverage this idea of passing quickly through multiple fast loading environments. It's something a Sonic game is begging for, in fact. But anyways, so I missed that there, and then I just happened, because my sleep schedule is very unpredictable, I happened to be working really late on the Monday, I guess it was Wednesday before the PlayStation came out. The Thursday, the 12th is when it was released. And the Twitter account Wario64, that people who have been looking for pre-orders know this account. Seems to always has the 411 on what retailers have what. Which is, so I just followed that, kept that going, refreshed it a while, and I was working on some a project, and then every half hour I would just refresh everything to see what had happened. And I actually just got lucky. There were these 5-minute windows, 7 or 8 times through the night, where they were available at retail and then gone 3 minutes later. And it just happened that I just happened to, and it was Target. It just happened to my every 30-minute refresh just happened to be during one of those windows. And I was utterly shocked, and I just it was already 4 a.m, and so
you're in a buying mood.
And I was, and so I just stayed up till 7 and then went and picked it up. So it was just anyway. I got myself PlayStation 5, and I got Dale an Xbox. I just got the pre-orders on that when they went back when. So I feel, other than fitting them into my entertainment center, I've been very pleased to have them. But I can give you my impressions of both. The Xbox is interesting because like I said before, it is just another Xbox. And your opinion on that it really depends on how you feel about how should consoles be more like PCs or should consoles be more like appliances, right? And those are really broad definitions. But I'm happy with either definition, I guess. I suppose if your budget is limited and if you're not as professionally interested as I am, then that choice is maybe a challenge for people. But I like sort of both approaches. I think they're both sort of smart. I like that both the companies are doing different things. I think that's cool because they can compete and one up each other on certain categories, but they can also innovate on other categories. So that's pretty exciting. And then you got Nintendo over there just eating their lunch, doing its own thing.
Yep.
But the Xbox is weird because there is not a single exclusive game for the new Xbox. Not one. Which is very strange. The Xbox Halo Infinite was supposed to come out at launch, but even that was going to be on Xbox One also. And that's good, right? Like you don't want to abandon a large console base or a customer base right away, but you do also want to have a showcase products to move units, right? And so it's a very strange approach. And I don't know how much of that is the fact that this year has been difficult for people to put out products, as well as the video game industry has been doing in 2020. And it's been doing very well compared to other industries. And it's kind of obvious why. It's still hard to work in these times. And so lots of stuff has been delayed for that reasons and other reasons. But I don't know. It's just there's no exclusive games. And so you kind of just, you can play some game. They load a little faster, I guess. It's like, unless you're measuring it for Digital Foundry, like, I don't know the real world benefit of that. And it really kind of sold me on the idea that the Xbox Series S, the smaller one, the one that's $299, I was not convinced that had a lot of value. It doesn't have a disk drive, so you have to buy only games directly from Microsoft. But in a world where I would rather people just buy indie games most of the time, it's the only place you can buy indie games. So, so that seems okay by me. And the fact that like it is still, that console is the baby Xbox, but it's still more powerful than the most powerful of the last generation, and it's really cheap. So if you want to get into that platform, if you want to get Game Pass and get all those games, if you like, it's a really good way to get into console gaming and not have to worry about like upgrading a big PC or whatever. So I think that's a great approach, and it's way different from what PlayStation is doing.
I have a note on that. There was a good piece a while back in October in IGN Middle East that was specifically about how cheaper next-gen consoles, calling out the Xbox Series S, could change the industry workforce, and talking about how, like, specifically all this data out of the UK, plus anecdotally what you just know about games industry jobs not paying super well and also being usually concentrated in places where cost of living is really high, that, like, just high console prices cut people out of the hobby, and they've always been expensive, especially when you adjust for inflation. Like the Atari 5200 at launch today would be like $700. So like $299 is not pocket change, but it's a lot less steep than what we're used to, which could allow more people like across the economic spectrum, more kids with working class parents to be able to play games, see games as a career, and maybe enter the industry. Whereas right now it's really clear that at least the data that's coming out of the UK, it's like more than half grew up in households where the main earner was like middle class managerial role, and like 81% of them have undergrad degrees. Like it's coming from a place of lots of like economic privilege. And so one path to getting a more diverse games industry is this cheaper little console.
That's really, really interesting, because I think one of the things that we've talked about on the show before is like games are too cheap, because we're coming at it from the developer perspective, which is it's oppressive to developers, because you need to make that up on volume, which means you have to design games for the masses, which means you have to market harder to sell more copies. You can't make a profit with a niche audience as much as you could in the past, perhaps. But it is interesting to hear that like the especially with something like Game Pass, which does worry me a little bit, if people expect to pay just a little bit a month for games and then they don't do any of the discovery themselves, that worries me quite a bit. But if it gets more people, if it grows the pie, right, it gets more people in the and the angle you were talking about gets them interested in the industry. That goes a long way towards like making it kind of worth the trouble that is also there.
Yeah, right. It's everything has the good side and bad side. But this is the first time. I mean, it's a kind of a golden age for games overall, which I know people with a lot of nostalgia would disagree with. But being able to buy a console for $300 and then have a $10 a month subscription service and have access to all these games, whereas before you would always have to shell out a lot more. It's a good time to be gaming, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, combine that like cheaper consoles with like the right learning tools in low income schools, and that would be a good thing. Cheaper devices mean game dev hopefuls are less restrained by the money in their pockets, which is cool.
Yeah. And so like that idea of just like riding the wave to the next generation, like making the costs low, all the same games, so you don't have to buy in now if you can't afford it yet. That is Xbox's approach. PlayStation's different. They're like, we want to excite people about new toys. And that appeals to me personally more, even though I value both approaches. And the PlayStation is kind of delivered on its like fun novelty, I guess. You'll be very proud of me. I played 3 games this week, you guys. That's a lot for me.
Whoa, 3 whole games?
I know. Not whole games. I played 3 games.
I finished 3 60-hour experiences.
Yeah, because I knew we'd be talking about this, and I'm like, because what happened was, because I had a busy week, so I got these consoles, I unboxed them, I put them on the top of my bookshelf because they wouldn't fit anywhere else, and then I didn't plug them in for 4 days.
There's so many people who are struggling to get these consoles right now who hate you.
I know, and I feel bad because I was like, I should really like. I owe it to everyone who fell in the battle. It was survivor's guilt, is what it was.
The veterans of the console war.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I played the new Spider-Man game, and that's one that's just Spider-Man, but more of it. But it stars Miles Morales, so there's some, he animates differently. It's actually it's been advertised as kind of a spin-off game, and I'm not really far into it. I'm an hour or two, but of the time I've spent, 30% of that time has been cutscenes. It is a high value production. It is I mean, I don't know how long it is, but because I'm an advocate of shorter games, I would call this a full sequel. It's really, really high production quality. And it of course benefits from having all the same combat systems, the same New York, all of that. That's what made them able to develop it in a year. But it's great. It's just more Spider-Man. I'm totally on board with that. I think the twist on Miles' story is pretty cool. I think a lot of people know Miles Morales, the character from Into the Spider-Verse, and maybe not from much else if you don't read the comics. And this is different from that. I would say the Into the Spider-Verse Miles has more character and is more fun. But I really like the setting and the plot of the story in this one so far, which is really cool. You get a strong sense of the character, not just his personality, but his attachment to his culture and his family. It's really, really cool. And I mean, most of the time you're punching goons, so right, because it's a video game.
Yeah.
But I did appreciate how much effort was put into the narrative. I really expect it to be like Spider-Man, Peter Parker goes on vacation, it's time for Miles to punch some goons. But there's actually quite a bit more to it, and I was very impressed. It's got ray tracing, looks fantastic. But the thing is the Spider-Man looked great. So the earlier game. So I don't know how much better it is. And I think that's one of the things that we're all going to have with this generation is games have been pretty good for a while in terms of AAA looks. There's some, I think ray tracing is one of those things where you can really identify a benefit, but there's not a lot of game mechanics that rely on you staring into a mirror. So it's not an opportunity to, when you play a game, to really benefit from those things. The one thing that the PlayStation does with the PS5 is its controller, which a lot of people have been raving about, has improved haptics. It has these things called adaptive triggers, where there's a great teardown video where someone just pulls the thing apart and you can actually see how mechanically it works. But the triggers offer physical resistance. So you know how some people compare controls the triggers on these a little squishier, or these ones a little harder to press. Well, on the PlayStation 5 controller, they're adaptive. They will change depending on the game mechanics. And I think it's kind of hit or miss, that feature. I'm curious to see what developers do with it, but it's definitely something you feel in the Spider-Man game where when you swing lower to the ground, you hold the right trigger to swing in that game. And as you swing lower to the ground, you get a little bit more, it wiggles a little bit, it kind of fights back. You it's almost like feeling the breeze as you go through the trees. There's lots of ways they try to adapt some real world feelings into the haptics of the controller and the triggers. But a lot of it's very much like what Nintendo did for HD Rumble. I think it's even the same technology, the sort of linear actuating motor that's in there. I think reviewers have said that it's better or newer, but I think it's just because the form factor on that controller is slightly differently, so it doesn't feel exactly the same. But I feel like they're not doing anything Nintendo didn't already invent. And I think a couple of years ago, it's going to be entirely up to developers to use it. And if the Switch is anything to go by, they're not going to use it that much. Right. The showcase for that, of course, is Astro's Playroom, or as my wife calls it, Astro Boy's Play Around.
Same diff.
Which is a way better title.
Yeah.
That is a game. It's a 3D platformer. You play as become this PlayStation mascot character that was introduced at the beginning of the PS4 console. This cute little chibi robot looking thing, and it's a 3D platformer, and it's all celebrating the history of PlayStation. It's PlayStation fan. It's something Nintendo would never do. Like Nintendo is obsessed with itself, but even they wouldn't make a pure like celebrate Nintendo product. I mean, they made a game called Nintendo Land, and it's not
Super Smash Brothers. Cough.
No, this is more a celebration of
It's
PlayStation.
more than that.
Then that is a celebration.
Wow.
Absolutely. Like you collect artifacts through each level that are peripherals. Like I collected the PlayStation 1 mouse. Like
yeah. Okay.
Yep. And with a trackball and everything, like it is. And what's interesting, like my relationship with PlayStation is I had a PlayStation 3 and I never had a PlayStation 1 or 2. So I don't have any nostalgia for the early history of PlayStation. But it's really cool to actually see it. Like, I don't know, it feels kind of honest in a way. Like it's very much like you rah our brand, but I'm kind of like very on board with it in a way. It's super cute. It's super fun. And of course I like gadgets. And so just seeing like all the collectible like webcams of the various generations of PlayStation in this platformer game. And the game is pretty good. It's very easy, but it's not a breeze. And so it's kind of tuned just right. It's like there's a lot of content, more than a tech demo would normally have, but it's not like a full, like it's not a 3D Mario in terms of how much there's to do. But so it kind of, it keeps you engaged enough to go looking for all of the branded items, right? It's like, it's just tuned very, very well. And that game, why I mentioned it is because it uses the PlayStation 5 controller and it is just completely decks out every possible feature. The little speaker on there is always chirping. You pull out an umbrella and then it starts raining and you can feel the raindrops as you hold the controller in your hand.
Cool.
You know, like when you have an umbrella, it's that little like, kind of popping, little slapping sound when it hits your plastic umbrella. You can feel that in your hand.
That's really well done.
A lot of the work of that happens between your hands and your brain, right? In terms of what's actually happening, it's like I said, technologically, it's certainly no more advanced than what the Switch is doing with its HD Rumble. It's just that the design of it really showcases it. And if you read a lot of the tech press or games press reviews of Astra's Playroom, you will definitely read people say like it's like magic. I have no idea how did the engineers do this. It's like no, it wasn't the hardware engineers. It was the software designers who really made that work, and that impressed me the most about that. It also does make me sad because I know nobody else is going to try it. It's an absolute ton of work. I've worked with the Nintendo's platform for HD Rumble, and I put a lot of that into Widget Satchel, and I'm very proud of that. But it was like more work than it needed to be. Like the tools are not super robust, and I don't have a lot of confidence that Sony has done much better because it's a very hard kind of idea to make really adaptive and really intuitive tools for. I'm sure they're doing their best, and it isn't to say they're not doing their best. It's just that it's hard to do, and so I don't know if anyone other than Sony first party studios are going to be doing much with it.
Mm-hmm.
Something I've been hearing a lot, being somewhat tapped into the games accessibility community, is like people are really they think the different things going on with the controllers are cool, and they're glad that, like, I guess Sony kind of took a page out of like The Last of Us Part 2, and they gave just a lot of options for being able to like turn off the what do they call it, the adaptive triggers, and turn on and off a lot of things. But overall, the design of the controller will be difficult for it, and their reviews was like difficult for players with small hands, which includes me. Hand pain or limited grip strength. It doesn't really work well with the currently their Sony's, most accessible and most customizable console. Still has problems.
The settings for vibration intensity and adaptive triggers they're on a sliding scale. It's not just on or off, so that is an accessibility win. But it's going to come down to the game design, because it's things when you want to design something that can be played by people who have color blindness, then you have to make sure that if you design features that require color recognition, you need to have not settings, then alternate modes of communication, like ways to do that. I think this just makes the job of developers much harder. And so I think what might end up happening is that they don't make those features in an effort to serve accessibility concerns. They don't make those features required, because then they would have to do way more work to then make alternate versions that are accessible. And so maybe that's ultimately good, because they're not going to be doing the thing of just making things that are not accessible. but it means that it's going to limit their ability to leverage the new technology because there isn't an easy way to make it accessible, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
And then Dale played a lot of Bug Snacks, which is adorable as hell, and that is my one sentence impression of that.
Well, you should have us over and we'll play. Oh.
Yeah, if you're not using that PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother is probably like drooling right now. He was
Yeah.
he really wanted it. He was really looking for pre-orders for the PS5. And we talked about this in the past. We've got like a secret Target that we go to where we get all the
Oh, that's
stuff,
right. I remember that.
launch.
What episode was that? We have to put that in show notes.
Oh yeah, I don't remember which one, but I'll look that up.
That's their secret.
McGregor Target?
What was that, Ellen?
The secret McGregor Target?
Yeah, the secret.
It's like a high inventory, low traffic Target that you've always gone to for
great.
console launches.
Yeah, but they didn't have any PlayStation 5, so
So never mind then.
I think you're just saying that so it stays.
Yeah, that's just the cover for 7 years from now.
Holly, what were you going to say?
Oh, I guess the Lake Street Target just reopened. It got lots of fire in it in May. And maybe not a lot of people know that, so I could go and snoop for you.
When I was to that point, the way Target did their orders is not the pre-orders, but the day of, the one that I got, is you had to pick which store to pick it up from, which meant that if you picked a store and then as you order it, they all get snapped up because of bots or whatever. Like there might still be many available. You just have to pick a different store. So it's actually kind of a clumsy system. And I saw the Lake Street Target on that list, and I was like, if I choose that, and it's not
the one that's on fire,
yeah, the one that's been closed since May, and I'm just like, well, good on them if they were to open it by now, but I don't know if I trust that with the 3 seconds I have to make a decision here.
Right.
Actually, the Lake Street Target, it stayed in the app for a long time, which was irritating because every time I needed to do a Target run, it was like, remember when you had a Target a mile from your place?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you don't. But remember that it used to be there.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Charles failing and getting a PS5.
Oh man, you're very proud of yourself, aren't you?
A little bit.
We'll allow it.
That was, actually you had an easier one, but because you don't have Bug Snacks and I don't have Bug Snacks, apparently Bug Snacks doesn't have these things that you're segueing to.
It does not have a fail state. Yeah, I guess I wanted to bring up fail states because I've been thinking about this especially in respect to like AAA games, because I kind of feel like AAA games don't do a good job of fail states, or at least it feels like they could do a lot better of a job. So I wanted to bring it up so I could talk to people who have more money. Hopefully they'll hear me and fix their stuff. So what are fail states? I wrote this definition. It's not a complete definition, but it's just the state where the game takes when a player has failed at a task. So like, for instance, if you fall in a gap in Mario, that's a fail state. When he jumps up and does I fell thing. Or getting caught in a stealth game, like those kinds of things would be considered fail states.
Right, not always deaths.
Yeah, they're not always deaths. A lot of them are. And a lot of fail states are binary in that way. Like you either did it or you didn't do it. But some of them are more granular, like in a stealth game, because like if you get caught, there's a chance for you to escape. Or sometimes you'll just get like spotted and they'll be aware of your existence, but they won't exactly know where you are. So like it's a different kind of state you're in. And then there's also like the amount of time it takes to get into a fail state is something to consider too. Like there's like sometimes like in Mario, for instance, when you run out of all of your lives, there's like a whole dramatic effect, and it's like, oh, you lost all your lives, shame on you and stuff. And it takes like 3 minutes. Then you can get back into the level you were just in.
3 minutes.
I mean, maybe not 3 minutes, but I'm exaggerating for effect. But
well, yeah, and lives are like a whole other thing on top of fail states. Like there are fail states, which is a leftover from arcade games, which makes sense because it builds tension and allows you to feel like you're winning. But the live system is just like, we're not putting in quarters. Do away with it. Anyway.
Well, yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
Well, what's kind of fascinating about like lives is that like the new Crash Bandicoot 4 came out, and it had two options where you could do the modern version when there are no lives, but it keeps track of how many times you've fallen and stuff. And then there's the retro version where like there are lives and stuff, and you have to pay attention to that. I just found that kind of interesting that like they had that effect. The fail states were still the same, effectively, but it could be more or less punishing, I suppose. But anyways, I wanted to get on my soapbox and say that AAA games don't do it right because I think that like oftentimes fail states in games are either too punishing or they don't make sense for the game you're playing. Like fail states can be a chance for people to learn things because like one of the best things about video games is that like you're in a safe environment where you can try a bunch of new stuff. And figure out how things work and get a better understanding of how this like environment functions. But if the fail state is very punishing, if every time you want to try to jump off of a cliff, there's a 30-minute long cutscene that tells you that you shouldn't do this thing, you're gonna stop trying to do that.
30 minutes. Now we're here.
Yep.
Dude, I want to play your version of the fail state game where it's just like 10 minutes of gameplay and then a 30-minute cutscene explaining why you're bad.
That's called Uncharted. But like, I think that like in the AAA space, we have like a more opportunity to better teach people things through fail states. But also like one issue I have with like fail states in AAA games is that like it's like an alternate history sort of thing. Like if you're playing Batman Arkham Knight, and you get beat up by random hench folk or whatever.
But you're Batman.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're Batman, and then like Joker is up above you, and he says, "Haha, you died," or whatever. That is like not how the actual game is supposed to go. That's not the flow of the actual game. So then it just like rewinds you back, and so like you have to kind of like do it again. That to me feels very weird. It kind of feels like you're an actor, like acting out a scene. Instead of like you playing through a game.
Wasn't that wasn't that the innovation of the first Assassin's Creed? Which is like, no, it didn't actually happen this way. You've been desynchronized from history. Right?
Yeah. And like that makes it more interesting and it makes it fit more into the world of the game. I don't know that
it backs into it a little bit, right? It's because mechanically it's not any different.
Right. Well, yeah, but there's this there's a game called I think Call of Juarez or something like that where like you're basically playing as somebody telling a story. And so like if you fail in that story, they're like, wait, that's not how it happened. This is how it happened.
Yeah.
And so like it's kind of the same kind of thing, but like it makes it feel a little bit different. I almost wish there was a game that like you how do I describe it? Like you are an actor literally acting out scenes, and it when you like don't do the scene correctly or something, they're like cut, do it again or something like that. And it like fits within the world a lot better.
I mean, ultimately,
I don't know.
It's not well surfaced, but Super Mario Brothers 3 is that, right?
That's true.
It's
because it's all a play.
Yeah. I mean, but it's a very light touch in terms of like communicating that to the player.
Yeah. But that's a good point. I didn't consider that before. Am I the only one who feels like this? Though I'm curious.
And I think the language that you're using to describe it too, Stephen, because basically, like there are a couple things that I've kind of grabbed onto in what you said. First is like the fail state doesn't have to be a punishment. That's a choice.
Yeah.
Fail state is a learning experience. And I know that I say those two words together all the time on the podcast, but like that's where you're teaching the player how to play the game, is that when you said, okay, you tried that and it didn't work, so let's try again. Yeah. And if you take that a step further and say, you tried that and it didn't work, dummy.
Yeah.
That's a choice that you make in your game. And that's pretty cool. I like the way that you were talking about that. I think that's really interesting what you're saying about like the way that fail state and narrative can kind of mess each other up. That's an interesting insight. I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that some, and the only thing I could come up with was that you're in a movie sort of thing.
Yeah.
A
couple of games have made efforts here. So BioShock had its Vita chambers where when you died, you revamp. It was a checkpoint, but in the
Yeah.
narrative, it was actually a clone of you or something. And it has implications that are not super well explored. But the idea is that it's kind of, and this thing, it's kind of wishy-washy on the truth of the matter, but like when you die, what you did in the world still happened, right? You can go and there are lots of games where when you die, you get to keep the things you collected. And so there's mechanical approaches to, instead of just rewinding time as a death checkpoint system might have. And then narratively, but I think you're right. Ultimately, no one's cracked it in a way that's really satisfying, partly because mechanically, players don't have a lot of complaints. And so in order to adapt it narratively, you'd have to mess with the mechanics in a way if you didn't just want to put a coat of paint on it like BioShock did, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's like definitely a hierarchy of fail states to be considered. Like this is from outside the perspective of game dev, but like if your game is really involved and demanding, your fail state shouldn't be super punishing because then that's just going to lead to people giving up. But then like on the far other end of games that do have fail states, like the failing is part of the game and finding fun ways to fail is the point. Like Surgeon Simulator, or like a really old, I want to say it was a Flash game. It was called, I'll remove the swear. It was called Don't Poop Your Pants. Where you just like put in different commands, and the fun of it was finding all the ways that it could go wrong. Yeah, but like on the other end of things, it's you have to determine whether you want like a slap on the wrist, which will like make people keep going, or a gut punch, which will make people quit.
Yeah. There's a VR game called Don't Press Anything or Don't Touch Anything. And you're in a room that's like a bunker silo, kind of like a missile control kind of setup, and anything you do will cause a fail state. And the goal of the game is to do all the fails. Like,
Right. Yeah. Like the inevitable YouTube videos, like all endings to, what was it? Don't touch anything.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Actually, ultimately, I would like it if like a fail state actually just led to the end of the game. That's something that like visual novels do a lot. Like you'll make a bad choice for something where it'll be like, do you want to save your kingdom or leave forever? And then you're like, no, I'm just gonna leave forever, and then that's the end of the game, and that like is ending 7 or whatever. Like I kind of wish that was a thing that was.
But you want it to be
games.
Satisfying for the player, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things like AAA games, you see like stats for trophies or achievements, and games are too long because not most people don't finish them, right? So this would just be a way to do that. Like if people aren't finishing your game anyway, like why not just cut it short? Like
Well, that reminds me. Actually, there was this one game called Shadow Complex where you're trying to save your girlfriend because she got kidnapped for some reason. I don't remember the exact details.
Sounds about right.
Was that one Orson Scott Card worked on?
What was that?
Orson Scott Card worked on that. There was some controversy there. I don't remember.
Maybe, I don't know. I am unaware of the controversy. But like, you could just opt to like run back to the car and just decide, oh, I'll just leave. And then the credits would roll after that. So I kind of like that.
And that's a gag ending, right? Like that's
it was a gag ending.
Yeah,
but like it was fun. But well, the reason why I say that like AAA games specifically I feel like aren't doing a great job of it is because I think that there's been a lot of innovations in the indie space that has improved on things a lot. Like I think about like Super Meat Boy, where whenever you die as Meat Boy, like almost a second later you're back into the game running. Like it doesn't really feel like a fail state. It just feels like you can just keep trying it over and over and over again immediately. And there are a bunch of like platformers that do that now due to that. I like to attribute that to Super Meat Boy, but if I'm mistaken, somebody correct me.
Well, Color Jumper, a game developed by a local dev here, and that I helped publish on the Switch, available now. That it was inspired directly by Super Meat Boy for its fast respawn. So I think you're right. I think that's where it is commonly attributed to.
Yeah.
Hyperdot has fast respawns too.
That's right.
Different kind of game, but like that was something that we heard a lot. Was like, oh, I'm so glad you can like jump straight back in and keep playing versus being like, oh, I failed and have to marinate with that for a little bit.
Yeah. It's a fail state, but it's not a punishment.
Right. There's not a
Right.
big like text treatment that says like you died.
Yeah. Speaking of that text treatment, I feel like Dark Souls and stuff, a lot of people, to me anyways, I think a lot of people think that those games are punishing, and they are, but I don't think it's due to the fail states.
Mhm.
Right.
Because I think they're pretty generous with like the amount of time or the amount of places you can save your progress. It's more that like it's just you make any little mistake and you die.
Mhm.
But even Dark Souls like is relatively their fail states are pretty nice to the player, I think.
Yeah.
It's-
They seem to have like hit that right balance of being like our game's really demanding, so we're not going to like slap you in the face when
Yeah.
you inevitably lose, because you're going to lose and that's how you learn.
Yep.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
get back to where you died. It's fine.
Yep. But like on the other hand, though, I think that like not having a fail state is sometimes or not having like a death fail state, I guess, like how Super Mario does it, can be sometimes an issue. Like I think we ran into this when we were working on Widget Satchel, where like there isn't technically an official fail state when
Mhm.
like you fall into a pit, because the pit has a floor somewhere and you'll land on the floor and you take no damage. And then you can get back up to where you started.
Right.
But it like you have to backtrack all the way back to where you started in order to continue forward.
Right. The game
Right.
has fail states, but it introduces something else. Like you're still playing the game, you're still running and jumping, but you're
Yep.
in a state of failure until you reach
Yes.
back the point. So it's almost metatextual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's fail state in the way that it would be a fail state in real life.
Right.
Yeah. I'm just imagining people like tumbling.
Depending on what
stuff.
your life fail is. If your life fail led to you dying,
Well,
that's the game over.
That's true. Game over. But like I think like that was a point of frustration for some players, and we tried to like make that better. I mean, I think we talked about this on the show.
We talked about it recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we tried to make it better by like adding conveyor belts to make you move more quickly, or like adding lifts or something to get
Yeah,
you
that's
back
right,
to where you
yeah.
started. And adding checkpoints and stuff where you could like
Yeah.
reload back to where you started.
And I put a lot of prizes in the fail
Yeah.
corridors, so that when you fail, like if you were really good at the game, you wouldn't get all the fun stuff. That was a
Mhm.
really important thing that I learned sort of midway through, is
Yeah.
to reward failure, which
Yeah.
is not something I think a lot of games do.
Very true. Yes.
You're rewarding experimentation, right? Because you can't
Yeah.
have experimentation without finding those failure states, and if you got to reward that too.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
you fall down a pit and you get a prize, then the next time you face a difficult jump, you won't be as scared to fall,
Yeah.
even if there's no prize down that hole, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. So we tried to mitigate it, but I think the fails once you got the rewards and stuff of the thing. I think people. I think it felt like Widget Satchel's fail states were too punishing after a while, and maybe in Super Widget Satchel we can work to resolve that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine balance between like giving people a nudge and in Widget Satchel's case, a reward to keep
Mhm.
working, or making them give up.
Yeah,
But
like
that's
what you say,
something-
Stephen. That's where the rewards ended up being necessary, because
Yep.
otherwise there would be too many places where it would feel too punishing.
Yep.
Because it was just giving someone a task instead of just letting them try again.
Yeah.
Right. And so many fail states, like what you're looking at is like what's lost and can that lost thing be recovered? And if what you're losing is time, that's rough. It can be rough.
Then no.
Yeah, like losing all your souls and then like maybe running back and being able to regain them is something, but like losing a lot of time to a pit on a space station is different.
Yep. Yeah. 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 But yeah, I guess I wanted to bring it up because I want developers to think about it more. And like, I mean, and I guess I didn't propose any like awesome solutions to this, but like, I don't know. I think that like there could be more work done in the space to make fail states interesting for players, to keep them playing even when they're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Do you feel that ultimately it's just that it's too big a challenge, or do you think that AAA games in particular are just not trying hard enough. Like they're not seeing it as a problem.
Yeah, I think they're not trying very hard. I think that it's accepted that like when you die in a thing, you just go back to a previous checkpoint.
Right.
And I see that in like if you watch streams or something, like if they're playing a new game or something and they die and the checkpoint was like 2 minutes late or 2 minutes before where they died, they're like, oh, this was a nice generous checkpoint. I think it's kind of like accepted that this is a fail state.
Yeah.
And this is how fail states work. Whereas I think that like we could be more. And like I said, I think it's hard. It's not an easy task, but we could be more creative with fail states to make them fit within the world and keep players playing a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, like failure isn't the only thing that gives victory meaning.
Yeah.
I would like the first thing I think of is just, as I mentioned before, the games that are either like built around all the fail states or games that have a little bit of variety in how you fail. Like as funny as it is to meme, like I can't think of it's like a woodwind and like a terrible noise that plays every time you die in whichever Uncharted game. If there's enough variety that like that it's something that people want to like compile into like a YouTube video, like if there's something to be learned by looking at like how other people celebrate or complain about fail states to see like how you can, if your game if it requires dying and starting over, how you can make that a fun experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess there's a little bit of that. It's weird because it's a mixed like win state, fail state in Hades. Is anyone else playing Hades?
I have not played it, but I've watched a bunch of it.
When you get to a certain point in the game, and you keep winning, like it has to boot you back to the beginning because it is a roguelike, and so it has a bunch of like little epilogues that it wrote basically. Which my first experience with those was actually seeing them in a tweet and being like, I haven't ever seen these screens before, and I didn't realize it was like a post credits thing that would happen. But I saw someone complaining about it, but I think they're kind of amusing because it's like a very like gritty narrator, just kind of sardonically reading how your character met his untimely end again. And like how it was embarrassing and bad, and like sometimes inputting like you could pretend that he lived happily ever after. Goodbye. So like it doesn't have to be mechanically, like you don't have to create new cutscenes, but there are easier ways to get to making failing interesting if that's something that your game requires.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. Roguelikes do a lot to make fail states interesting because like you like progress through the game as you fail. Whereas other games do not do that. And you like get better as a player, but also you oftentimes your characters will get better, or you'll learn more about things so you can do better in future lives. And then ends up working out in a way that I think is successful. That's a good example, Holly. I didn't really think about that. Good call.
I'm glad I thought of it right now. Here.
Yes.
I was just talking to a friend actually who she doesn't game very much, but her and her husband are trying to find some games to play together, and they just started a new game that I quickly looked up because she said it was really hard, and I was like, I think it's a roguelike or has like roguelite elements, whatever.
Yeah.
And like quickly had to reassure her, like, oh, the point of the game is that you die, like you get your butt kicked really early and often, and you're going to get better. So like, don't get frustrated. Which to me is obvious when I play a game like that, or at least is obvious after that initial cutscene where I die, and I'm like, how was I supposed to beat that? And then I realized, oh, that's the point. I forgot that this is the kind of game I'm playing. But for an outsider, I was like, no, you have to keep going. Don't get frustrated. This is the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we could just make that more apparent through the game design and the narrative of games, I would appreciate that. That's all I'm asking for.
So, Mark, Steven,
yes.
We have a Patreon now.
Wait, haven't we already talked about this?
Yeah, but we gotta say it like a little bit frequently so we don't forget about it.
Are you telling me that people need to hear something more than once for it to work?
Yes.
Yeah, Holly, does that sound right to you?
Oh, am I supposed to talk in this? I literally. I was just like gonna let you roll. I was gonna be like, No, that does sound right to me. I think the like old marketing knowledge is you're supposed to have like 7 touches or something. Is the creepy way they put it.
7
like
touches.
you're supposed to. Someone has to be told to do. Not even in a Patreon context. Oh, sorry, I'm derailing this. But like they need to be told about a product they already want like 7 times before they act, and that's old knowledge. I'm sure now it's like
okay,
Listener, that
I'm
sounds
on
terrible. So if all of you just become patrons now, then by
they'll stop doing
next
these.
episode we won't have to do this anymore.
Yes. Alternatively, we could say it 7 times. Join our Patreon. Join our Patreon. Join our
That's
Patreon.
not-
Join our Patreon. Join our
I don't
Patreon.
know.
Join our
I dumped it
Patreon.
down a
I mean,
little
maybe
bit.
could be.
There's exclusive content on the Patreon.
That's my next question is, what is on the Patreon that people might want to go to the Patreon for?
We've got extras. Like we recorded like an extra tidbit for our 200th episode that you can listen to. It's very
Tidbit really undersells it. It's 42 minutes of additional nonsense.
42-minute tidbit.
Do you like nonsense? Support us.
Yeah.
You can pay for this nonsense.
Yeah. We also have some extra outtakes up there for you. We put outtakes at the end of the show very frequently, but we had so much going on in the 200th that we put a bunch of them up there on the Patreon for you. And that's what's there now, but there's going to be more in the future. But mainly, we're not there to gate our content. It's there for you to support us. And so that is us putting a lot of trust in you, the listener, that if you feel you get value from the show, that Patreon is a way for you to support that. That doesn't mean that we're going to be ever putting, numbered episodes back there. But it means that if you value our episodes, that might be a way for you to express that support. So we really would appreciate it.
Occasional dog pictures.
That's true. We did promise Ellen plus dog pictures, and we've got a lot of people working on that right now. So
yes,
we'll
we're
get
hard
back to you
at work.
shortly. Steven, how are people going to get there?
nicegames.club/Patreon.
All right, it's time for my topic. I have no fancy transition because we have a lot to go over. Oh wait,
No, I
Ellen,
lost it.
you
I
had
had
something?
one.
No?
I had one. It just didn't make sense anymore. Never mind.
We
Thanks.
have Martha back for one episode, and then we start to get confident. And
I mean, I think
Serves us
it's a
right.
pretty easy line from, especially wanting people to be more.
Oh,
Like,
Holly thinks
narratively
it's
interesting
easy.
with fail state. And you can why don't your segue should always just be like, speaking of game dev. It's covered.
oh man, you solved it for us. That's brilliant.
Speaking of games,
World building is my
here's
topic.
another. Yeah, see what? Wow.
You're right, Holly. It works. It's
Yep.
in evidence. So what's interesting about this topic is we have talked about world building quite a lot on the show. And now that we're past 200, we actually have to go and search the archives to see if we've talked about something already. Like that's how many we've done. And I did. And I searched the archives. And there is the phrase world building does not appear in any episode title, topic title, or show notes. We've talked about it a lot, but we've never really focused on it, at least to the amount of building a whole topic around it. So I think a lot of this information we've talked about in bits and bobs throughout the years, but let's put it all together right here. So one of the things that I wanted to go over is just the different types of world building. I think it's a pretty broad topic. I think most people are somewhat familiar with it, but it's about narrative settings, right? It's about the place your world, the place your story takes place in. And there's different approaches you can have. And so the two main categories I've split this into are building entire worlds, like complete fantasy, science fiction, magical realist, all complete worlds, top to bottom. Everything is different, little touchstones maybe from reality, but just so you can understand what it is. And that's the sort of classics, right? The Star Treks, your Star Wars, your Lord of the Rings. Those are entire worlds, right? In games, you know it when you see it. Mass Effect is a really odd example. Another one is Super Mario, because Super Mario has nothing from the real world exists in Super Mario. It's a completely invented world. It doesn't hang together very well, but it is. I would put it in this category.
Yeah.
The other side of this is very common in games, and particularly in film, is basing your world around sort of a single premise. So it's the real world, but with X, right? So you got your Ghostbusters, you got your Watchmen. I mean, superhero worlds. Even though if you read the comics, especially, it's complete. They become larger and larger and become complete worlds after a while, but they are still ostensibly based in a real world with a twist, right? BioShock's a good example of this, where the actual physical setting is completely invented, but the world it takes place in and the context by which you bring your sort of the lens by which you see it through is the real world. But what if a libertarian crazy person built an underground city in 1950? Yada yada.
Yeah.
Yep.
Assassin's Creed is also this. It's historical fiction to a point, with a sci-fi twist, and it's based in our real world, even though what you see in the game is usually, a pretty fantastical or feels fully invented, even in the ones that are more historically accurate on the spectrum of Assassin's Creed games. But those are the two sort of things, and you can tell just from my description of them, there's lots of crossover, right? And partly because when you want to build an entire world, it's such a big task that you really aren't going to do it, right? It's mostly just like you get the badge. Yes, I build a whole world, but literally you didn't, right? You built 5% of a world, and then you took 25% from the existing world so people would know what things are called, and that up is up and down or in the right direction, stuff like that. And then the rest of it is just unwritten, right? And is implied. And so that's one of the things I think people have some difficulty when they want to build a whole world. I think people who do like Dungeons and Dragons campaigns are sort of familiar with this, where you build the world that interacts with your story. Yeah. And you can, or you don't have to build any more than that. And I think both of those are good techniques. And I want to ask you guys about that, like thinking about the own stories you've created and the games you've worked on and the things you're fans of. That those two techniques of like building it as you go and as you need it to tell the story you need to tell, versus like going on a retreat and writing the whole encyclopedia and then putting stories inside of it.
I think I would think of it in terms of game design, because literally that's all I ever do.
Yeah.
And and so I like the way I would think of it is like I oftentimes will fall in the trap of over designing and like just thinking about my designs before actively trying it out. And I think that like to me it would be best for my mind anyways to try think of some things and then try them out and see how that would work. So like I might start by like writing up this world has moving stools. I don't know. They walk, they talk.
Steven, I love when you force yourself to come up with. I love when you force yourself to come up with one example.
and it's just
because it's always fine.
Stools are alive. Got it.
Yep. Stools are alive.
I mean, do they have like eyebrows and everything, or?
Well, that's
just stools, though. It's not like a Beauty and the Beast.
See, this is the world you got to build out. Like, are they sentient?
The only furniture.
Well, yeah. So, like, I start with that, and I'm like, oh, this is a story of a stool that's just trying to get a full-time job, and but then like you try that out, and you start writing some stuff, and you're like, wait a minute. How did the stools eat? And then you start thinking about all of these other things, and it starts branching into more stuff. So that helps me for like in my mind, I guess. But that might not work for everybody else.
A good example on that dimension is Paper Mario: The Origami King, which recent game, and there's the story in that is they do actually get into the details of how a piece of origami comes alive. And it's a fantasy world, so there's not a lot of like they don't cross all the T's, Sure. But they don't address things like how do they eat, like and I think that's
the annoying part is people love to find those inconsistencies, and like I don't think a lot of creators are in a place to be like, no, we didn't figure out how they eat, and you shouldn't care, like. You're not cool.
Yeah. Well, your story and your structure in games, particularly like the experience a player has, tells you, the designer, or the writer, or whoever you are in that process. It should inform how much you need to fill in those blanks and how much of a problem it is when you don't. And in certain cases, not answering those questions is perfectly fine. And in fact, the fact that they're not answered might lead to some of the sort of charm and tone. of a world that you build. And in other places, it becomes something that just hangs in your head and you can't let it go, like as a player or someone who watches or experiences it. And it's not, you don't always know which it is when you're designing a thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what's the method of locomotion, Stephen, for these stools? Like,
like,
are they magic or just?
Like, I didn't think this through, Mark.
But Steven's focus. The story is about a stool that wants a job, and let's say that it wants a job other than being sat upon, which is what most stools settle on.
Yes.
This stool wants to
pays
be
okay, but it's not satisfying.
First stool in space.
Yes. I can see it now.
That's good. So whether those nitpicky things will come up, or it really depends on the rest of the thing you build around it. And in games, particularly the type of game that it is, the experiences that you have. Would those questions come up, or or would they come up in a way that your dismissal of them becomes part of it, or not? And so that introduces some challenge.
Yeah.
But thinking back to fail states and Widget Satchel, one of the reasons Sprocket doesn't die is if Sprocket died, then that would be the saddest damn thing. But also, we were talking about, you rewind time. So ultimately, once you beat the game, the story was that Sprocket didn't die. But that's not good enough, right? In Widget Satchel, the possibility of Sprocket dying goes against the world that we built, right?
Yeah.
So. And that's what when you talk about fail states, that's what makes death in a lot of games very weird and incongruous with the worlds that get built. Like, it's so strange that Yoshi can die. Not in Super Mario World where Mario throws him away. That's hilarious. I mean, in a Yoshi game, it's weird because of the tone of those, even though they're sort of hard games. And you can see in Mario games, they say too bad, and Mario doesn't get impaled. Mario goes, like his animation is, shucks, as the iris closes in. It actually doesn't even imply that Mario dies, weirdly. And Stephen, like you were saying, they don't do a good job of this. But that's an important part of when you coming up with all sorts of like mechanical interactions of your game. And even if it's not how the story is, the canonical story, it takes place in the world still, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about, like, Stephen, you sort of set the tone with your earlier topic, but like things that people make, mistakes people make. And I think that's an easy way, there's an easy lens by which to talk about topics like this. One of the things in world building that I think a lot of people do is they build these interesting places, these settings, and then they're satisfied with that. And then they don't follow their own rules, like moment to moment. And I think that can be, it sounds like laziness, but in fact, it's just lack of diligence. Like, it's hard to follow your own rules, especially especially the more novel or unique things you have. So a lot of times there'll be like real world concepts will bleed through. So you'll have, this happens a lot in television because they need to tell 13 to 20 hours of story a year. And if you have a world that's based on something really bizarre, like, I'm not going to do the one example, Stephen, because it'll be just as silly as yours. But what happens when you build these worlds is that then you have to stick to them. So, here's an example. So Star Trek does this in a way that disappoints me sometimes, where early seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation talked about how, someone says like, oh, your parents cooked for you. They touched real meat. That's incredible. And it's like, oh, because in the future there would be no animal products whatsoever. And then later in the show, you hear someone talk about like, oh yeah, like, we lived on a farm and we didn't touch replicated food. And then you hear that that's kind of like a common thing people do. And you're like, but earlier it was so unusual. Or also in Star Trek, people will talk about how like there's no alcohol, you have synthahol, right? It's just to replicate it. But then because in the real world, when people get together and chill out, they want to have a glass of wine or something together. So you'll have a scene like that in Star Trek. Like, and you'll have things that need to be relatable to the real world audience, but then violates your own rules. Yeah. And so it's not something that just happens when you're lazy. It just happens when you've got a lot of material to produce, or when you set these rules and then maybe aren't interested in them anymore. Like, and that's a choice you need to make. Like, if you're making one game, you should be able to go back and change the thing if you've changed your mind on a rule. But I think it's okay to change the rules if it serves another purpose. I'm not so much of a nitpicker to prevent someone from doing that. But
I have a question related. The only universe that I can think of that does like there's comics do this a
Mhm.
lot, where they're just like, we're resetting it and we're starting
Yeah.
over. And the other one I was thinking of, like, it's like the Star Wars extended universe, where they're like, all of that is canceled, fresh
Yeah.
start.
Mm-mm.
Is that where does that happen in games often?
Mortal Kombat did it,
I guess games don't have.
right?
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say it'll have to be something that's been around for a
Yeah,
long
Yeah.
time.
Mortal Kombat did it where it was, and I don't know why I know this because the only Mortal Kombat I played was the original. But they actually, well, I know why I know this because I'm interested in this kind of topic where they in Mortal Kombat 9 or 10, I think they just retold the story of Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3. Which apparently there's a story. That was a thing I learned also. And they retold it, but they didn't do it by just like a reboot. They had somebody go back in time and like change the timeline, right?
Oh.
And they did it partly so that they could tell it fresh, new, and like modern sensibilities, and change some things and make change their mind about some stuff, but also to sort of preserve that past. Star Trek, in fact, did it as well. The 2009 Star Trek movie, which split off the timeline for those 3 films, also had a connection to the original Star Trek timeline. And that was less about wanting to come up with a cool way to do it and more about not wanting to anger Star Trek fans, frankly. But I thought they did a pretty good job, all told.
Yeah.
I know why they did it was a little bit kind of maybe like they might not have made that choice if they didn't have to, but they did a good job, I thought. But I don't know, in other games, I can only think of Mortal Kombat that's tried it to do it that way.
Yeah, and a lot of them, like long-term franchises, they just kind of like nod to the fact that this is in a timeline. Like Mario games usually like reference that Mario and Bowser have been like not getting along for a while, which is part of the fun of like Paper Mario Origami King, because you had to team up, and they were like, we will go back to war immediately when this is done. And Zelda games, which I got to have the experience of like playing and enjoying these games outside the like the meta and the criticism of them, that I didn't I know that lots of people put a lot of time into like trying to figure out the Zelda timeline, where I just kind of like internalized thinking that like, oh no, each Zelda game is just like a retelling of the same legend.
Yeah.
Like there's not a timeline. It is the same story every time.
Right. And that's what's fun. Final Fantasy is not quite, every Final Fantasy is very different. Explicitly so. But also they all have chocobos. Like, they all have each of those worlds has some touch points, and that itself is this larger, almost meta world building. And I think Zelda does a really good job of that because they focus on what matters, which is the game they're making right now, and and the rules they've set for themselves. That's more important. So any inconsistencies, it doesn't just get chalked up to whatever. It actually adds to the tapestry of and not even in a way that needs to be kept track of on a sprawling wiki, although definitely that's been done. It's about the sort of feeling. It's less about like, who was president of that province, 700 years ago in the codex history of our kingdom. It's more about like setting a tone for the world that lives in. So it's not just about facts and magical spells and when technology was invented and which aliens are out there. There's more to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I think the other thing that a lot of times happens that people have difficulty with is like they don't necessarily spin out the implications of the choices they make. So this happens a lot in like superhero stories. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is probably like they've made efforts to this, but they can never commit. Which is, so superheroes are real, right? So in that world, what else is different? But the value of a Marvel story, at least the way that Marvel does it, if I'm going to take them at their word and give them full credit, which is that their stories matter because they take place in the real world. Like that's what gives those the plots weight. But once you build this sprawling universe, it becomes preposterous for lots of real things to happen. Like entire genres of literature would go away, and like complete organizations would be formed, and our conversations about civil liberties would be a lot different. And so the analogies that you have in a movie like Civil War, those arguments they're having make sense in our world, but they don't make sense in their world. And so I think there's debate as to which is more valuable, right? The consistency within the world you make or the value that your story provides. I think ultimately what we want to do is satisfy both halves of those things by having world building that's consistent and logical and feels like, because it gives the story power and weight when it follows its own rules.
Yeah.
And spins out its implications, but then also can relate to the message it's trying to send. I think but it becomes very, very easy to sacrifice one for the other. And I think a lot, maybe even most pieces of fiction do that.
Yeah, I would say like it's the one of many upsides of like of really rich world building is that people want to live in it. Like this is why like fanfic exists, that people are like, I like those rules and I want more of it. The downside is that like it's hard to get like the complexity of the human condition really in any like universe like this. And what I'm thinking of specifically is there's a piece recently in Polygon about queer identity in Watch Dogs and Watch Dogs Legion specifically, and how like the game made all these big strides for representation, and it's clear that the person who wrote it is overall a fan, but like queer identity is basically flavor text. So like you can pick from all these folks, you can like pick from all these recruits, and I'm speaking from someone who hasn't played Watch Dogs Legion, and I'm sorry, but who have these really complex, interesting backstories, but none of that is actually like reflected in their experience. And so they're making the kind of needed trade-off, but like they chose to have like all this cool, these people have these cool big identities that like, but they're just like okay being like a trans person of color living in like fascist London. Like they're, I don't know, it doesn't connect completely. I guess.
Right. And that's right.
They're like their life should be different than it is. Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot because, and the thing about Watch Dogs Legion is that it's trying to tell a story about living under fascism, and by making people who feel either relatable or identifiable to certain players, it ends up failing its mission in a sense.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to, and I understand where they're stuck too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like they want to have this inclusivity, and they also like they don't necessarily want to tell stories of personal tragedy that will get people pointing fingers and being like, I didn't really need to like relive my experience as like with trauma and with discrimination here in this game, even though it is in a like a fascist state.
Yeah. And that's where the types of world building gives you different approaches to that. Like Watch Dogs is the our world, but this, right? Plus this one feature. And so, whereas you could build a world where there's like analogs or allegorical connections, and but you have different minefields there. And this happens a lot with science fiction that has alien races that are meant to sort of replicate real world, sociopolitical connections or racial relations or things like that. Happens a lot of times. I think Wizards of the Coast has recently made a lot of effort to make changes to the way the Dungeons and Dragons lore works to remove some of the sort of long-standing problems with those racial analogs and the way that they work in that world versus the way that they feel and how they feel they're adapted from our world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder, something I always, there's kind of the middle ground that you spoke about, Mark. There's the like completely invented world, our real world with X, and then there's ones that like take those completely invented stereotypes, or not stereotypes, those archetypes of like Lord of the Rings being kind of the blanket for like high fantasy sort of, and make twists on that. And then that's where they bring in some of like the real world elements. Like I'm thinking of Dragon Age specifically, and how instead of like mages being like lauded and powerful in Dragon Age, they're like, we're going to flip that and everyone's going to be afraid of them and they're going to be locked up. And also they do the same thing with elves. And I don't know, I wish I knew a little more what kind of criticism existed around it, because it was kind of the same deal. Elves, instead of being like immortal and lauded and beautiful, are kind of like clearly the victims of some kind of colonization, and have like lost a lot of their history because of humans, which is interesting. That was just me talking about Dragon Age. Clip that. I don't know where I was going.
This has been.
No, well, I think that like those points are important too, because like that is an aspect of world building that I think doesn't get talked about. Like Mark, you brought up Spider-Man Miles Morales, and like how you play as Miles Morales and he is a mixed race kid, and from what I've read, I also have not played this game, but from what I've read, it doesn't do a lot. Like Miles isn't being discriminated against, whereas in the real world he might be. Well, might be.
Well, I will say there's something interesting about that I noticed, and I haven't played far into it, but one of the things about superheroes that I think it's like a little detail, it's one of those nitpicky details, but it has a big implication that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is like the there's like the Zorro mask, right? The sort of the domino mask that covers your eyes. And like that is the sort of quintessential original superhero disguise. But that was created in a world where we just imagined everybody would be white. Because because you don't disguise your whiteness, but in a multicultural world, that's an identifying component of yourself, your race, and in a way that didn't think the people who designed these fictions didn't feel that way. So when you see superheroes that are not wearing gloves or not or have like exposed arms, like, and they have secret identities, you kind of have to wonder now, is that a practical, logical thing anymore? And in Spider-Man, there's a storyline about how Miles is the second Spider-Man, and it's almost a comedy runner where people say like, oh, you're the substitute Spider-Man. All right, I guess you can help me. Like they kind of make fun of him. You're like, oh, you're the other Spider-Man. Or when's the real Spider-Man coming back? Right, and it's kind of a gag. But then also there are parts where Miles's suit gets torn. And you can tell that he is a dark-skinned person, and maybe you'd even identify that from his voice. But there's nobody treats him on that dimension in a way that I think even in multicultural New York, I would think there might be some effort to, there might be some reaction to that. Like you might have some people say like whether they assumed Peter Parker or whoever real Spider-Man is white or not, and I was actually kind of surprised because the game does make an effort to make his identity as a mixed-raced kid in New York, going from Brooklyn to Harlem, and like not just like the racial component, but like cultural, even within New York. Like that is a big part of the story in its flavor. And so I was kind of surprised actually that because of that idea about the other Spider-Man that it didn't. But I don't know, how would you approach it? It's kind of a sensitive topic because it hasn't been talked about a lot.
One thing to their credit is like Insomniac seems to have realized from what I've read that Miles can't have the same relationship with the police as Peter Parker did. But also, so it's kind of pivoted away from Spider-Man's relationship with police compared to old games. But the police are also only ever interacting, I think, with Miles while he's in full Spider-Man getup, and you can't see any of his skin.
Yeah, but also Miles's father is a cop, and that's taken from the comics, and so that dimension is kind of strange. I think people have some difficulty with that. But
I think that I mean I might be wrong about this, but I've read that it's not taken from the comics. I don't think that he was a cop in the comics.
Oh, is that not the case?
Maybe I think so. Yeah,
I know he
is in the movie too.
Yeah. Maybe it's inspired by that then.
Yeah,
But more than that, I think that there is another Polygon article about that changed relationship. And from the amount of game I've played so far, it's mostly that they're just not talking about it anymore. It's not. Yeah. He's not on the radio with Yuri, the cop from the earlier game. Right. But I don't think it goes far enough for that. But also, like, that's a question of like, if you're an artist telling a story, you get to decide what you feel about that, right? It's like, just because he's, a mixed race kid doesn't mean he couldn't have that relationship with the cops, other than people might be mad about that. But like, as a storyteller, you get to decide if you want that to be. And so I'm a little worried that ultimately what it's going to be is them just trying to back away from the issue rather than address it. And so far, that's what it seems like. And that's kind of disappointing. I mean, you can't have everything, right? I think the game does a really good job in a lot of ways. But this is the thing that makes world building interesting, is like it's not just about a cool place where cool things happen, or it's about what it means for the story you're telling. And that's the thing that you need to do, is have a connection between the story you want to tell and the world it takes place in. And ultimately, and we've talked about these examples, like, you're not going to get it right. Like, there's going to be I think that's when you are trying to create a fictional place, you do become kind of obsessed with all the details, making sure it all hangs together. And that's important. But ultimately, what ends up being more valuable is how it relates with the story you're telling. And that is a harder lift. And I think it's okay if you can't lift it all the way. But Stephen, just like you're saying about fail states, games don't try hard enough. I feel the same way about this. I think people are just much more invested in cool worlds than they are in using those things to tell specific stories that can only be told in those worlds. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. That gives me like good like tummy tingles though. I'm like, oh, imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine that the story that could be told in one of these worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And
it,
cool.
We talk about a lot of big franchises because those are the easy, ready examples we have. And those are worlds that were built long ago, and then new stories get told in them. And so that is something. So you aren't always doing the initial world building yourself, but it's depending on the story you want to tell. Like, how do you tell it in that world? Is it a twist on it? Is it a subversion? Is it a deconstruction? Like, these are all options you have. And in video games, especially our audience, I assume, is mostly indie developers. We don't have we can't do a lot of 5-minute cutscenes in our games. We can maybe budget one or two for the beginning and end of the thing, and then we have lore drops, and we have environmental storytelling. We have a lot of tools at our disposal, and certainly I don't mean to say that we can't do more than that. It's just that we don't often do more than that because of the scopes of our games. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't put the effort into building entire worlds. It honestly doesn't make the job an iota easier, frankly. It just means that there's slightly less of it to do, if that makes sense.
Those are just like my English major feelings.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go read a book.
Let's all go read a book.
Or play a video game. That's also fine.
Right. Speaking of video games.
Yep. Bring it back.
Yeah.
Well, Holly, thanks so much for joining us and providing us with an excellent cool down for the show.
No problemo.
And what's this? We're going to have you next week as well for our next episode. Is that right?
I can't believe it, but yes.
Well,
the hard thing is I can answer those questions in a natural way, and I just don't choose to, and I should look inward and see what that means. What are you hiding?
Well, listener, if you want to know if she's made any progress on that, tune in next week when Holly joins us again.
That's our show. Check out our newly revamped website, nicegames.club, for show notes and links to resources on today's topics. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and on our programming in general. Go to nicegames.club/feedback and tell us what you think. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter at nicegamesclub, where Dale tweets about game dev resources and dogs on mushrooms. Or you can email us through contact@nicegames.club. Want to support the show? There are so many ways! Give us a review on your favorite podcast app, tell your friends about your favorite episodes, and now we're on Patreon. As a patron of the show, you'll enjoy bonus content, extra jokes, and more. Sign up at patreon.com/nicesgamesclub.
So until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice.
We did it.